Okay, so in this video, we're going to set up the flow and functionality of our waves. I know we said we were going to do that last time, but we had to figure out the whole visual thing first. So essentially what I want to do is from my wave spawner, I want to say for each wave associated with my wave spawner, I want to start spawning. And then in my wave, I want to say for each spawn point inside of my wave, I want it to spawn. And we're going to lay that out in code in a very similar way. So I'm going to start with my spawn point. I'm going to go to open up my blueprint spawn point. And let's see here. We're just going to get rid of all this. We don't want anything to happen automatically. We want to call the spawn point. Remember, this is these things over here. I'm going to call the spawn point specifically when we need it. So I'm going to create a custom event. So right click, type in custom event. And we're going to call this, we're going to call this spawn enemy. All right. And so other blueprints, if they get a reference to this blueprint, can actually see this and call it. So whenever this gets called, I want to actually just double check and put a little print statement and say spawn enemy. All right. So if we see this print statement, we know that we're calling this custom event properly. Compile, save. All right. So now let's go to our, let's see. So wave spawner is going to call the wave, and wave is going to call each of the spawn points. Let's go to our wave spawner. Remember, this is this one right here. When we enter, it gets called, and we were already proving that. Actually, no, sorry, let's go back. We're going to go to our enemy wave. So we could have multiple enemy waves with different spawn points associated with it. But in this case, this is for all of my enemy waves. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create, so right click, type in custom function, where it says add custom event, press enter. And let's call this, so we did spawn enemy, and we'll say start spawning wave. All right, cool. And so here, first I want to do a print string, and say, pretty descriptive, start spawning wave. Okay, great. And after that, I need a reference to something in order to start spawning. So let's see here. What I want to get to is if I go back to my diagram, I want to get to these spawn points right here so that I can get the reference to this instance of the blueprint and then call the spawn enemy event that we set up on there. Just like our diagram, I'm going to open this again. Our wave needs a reference to each of these spawn points. I'm going to fill these in the inspector or the details panel, whatever you want to call it. And in order to do that, we need a reference to this class. So in order to do that, I am going to say, let's say this, spawn points. Let's create a reference to our spawn points that we can actually see in the inspector. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to click this enemy wave and then assign all of the spawn points inside of this, this detail panel over here. So in order to do that, we're going to make a variable of spawn points to associate with this. So that's going to be an array. And we're going to make it viewable in the details panel. In order to do that, all we need to do is go to over here in variables, click add a variable, and we're going to call this spawn points. Now it defaults to a Boolean. We actually want to change this. And if we click here, we want to assign this to be, start typing it in, BP underscore, whatever we call it, spawn point. And you'll see we have two different ones. This is the one that we made. If you hover over whatever you named the spawn point, which for me it was BP underscore spawn point, you'll see a class reference or an object reference. Now an object reference means that it's something it's an instance of this blueprint inside of the world. So when we dragged them into the world, that would be an object reference. A class reference means that it's just the class inside of your assets. So if you wanted to spawn a new thing at runtime, you'd probably want a class reference. But if you wanted to reference something that's already been spawned and already exists inside of your level, you want an object reference. So since we're dragging it, we've already dragged in the spawn position, so we want an object reference. So I'm gonna click this right here. Now the other thing is we could have multiple spawn points. So I want to turn this into an array. To do that, where it says variable type up here, click this little circle. It may appear to be something different for you, but I want to go down here to array, this little thing right here. Okay, so your variable should look like mine at this point over here. And the last thing we need to do is we need to make this editable within the details panel. To do that, just click the little eyeball right there, or you could click this over here. Either way is fine. Compile, save, great. It's going to default as empty. That's totally fine. And now what we want to do is we can assign these spawn points in the details panel. Sorry, Unity crossover terminology. I'm going to drag this over. You can see now we have this default variable thing over here. And if we were to add elements, let's see, we add 2 elements, and we want to assign these spawn points. Now the cool thing is, because we were pretty good about our naming convention over here, if we click this drop down, it's only looking for a class of type spawn point. So we can actually click this one right here. That's one, SO1, that's gonna be here. You know, I wonder if we can, you can probably lock it and drag it in, but I'm just gonna search for it just by the name, so you're gonna do this and assign 2. Okay, great. Whatever you can do to get it over there is fine. Okay, so now this wave right here, we've assigned the spawn points, and now if we save it, save current, save all, just to be safe, save all. Okay, we're not actually doing anything with it, but we have assigned the spawn points to this wave, which is fine. So I'm gonna open back up the enemy wave, and from here, now that we have our spawn points, we can actually reference them. And what I wanna say is, for each spawn point that we have, spawn the enemy on that spawn point. And to do that, pretty easy, just drag off, type in for each loop. For each spawn points, so we just need to define the array that we want to look through for the for each. So for each thing in this array, drag in spawn points. To get spawn points, we just want to reference our variables over here. And drag in, so this is the array we want to cycle through with for each. And we want to say for each spawn point in the array spawn points, we want to do a thing. And over here, if you try to drag out and you type in spawn enemy, it may or may not let you. In this case, it is. The reason we can do this is because we can say this spawn point, right? This spawn point, we've already defined to have this event, right? Because if we open up spawn point, we've already said each spawn point has a spawn enemy event that we'll call the spawn enemy thing. So I'm gonna click back over on enemy wave. So now if we say this particular spawn point as we're looping through, check that in right there, call the spawn enemy custom function. So if you type that in, you should be, as long as you dragged off of it, you should be able to do that. So if you double click here, it'll go through each spawn point and do spawn enemy. Okay, great. You can actually, you should be able to click back here somewhere. All right, great. Compile, save, and we want to do something similar. So you could do this as a practice run if you want to set this up before we do it. But the same concept, all we want to do is we want to say for each wave, we want to spawn all the spawn. So when we hit here, for each wave, start spawning. And then inside of each wave, for each spawn point, spawn the thing. Just like our previous diagram. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I potentially want multiple waves here. Right now I only have one, which is fine, but I want to add the possibility of having multiple waves. So open up your enemy wave. Right here, that's gonna be this one right here. The thing that starts everything. Oh, wrong one. We actually wanted our wave spawner. Okay, just remember what you named it. But it's essentially this right here. I think if you double click, it'll do the same thing. All right, so same thing, come over here, create a new variable. Call this, what do we want to call this? Call this enemy waves. Enemy waves. Again, we want this to be of type BP underscore, whatever we called it over here, underscore enemy wave. So create your variable, the variable type, the drop down, BP underscore enemy wave. Okay, and when you hover over that, again, we're dragging our waves into the scene. So we actually want an object reference. We want to define this inside of our scene. So our waves exist inside the world. So it's going to be an object reference. And make sure to turn this into an array because we want the possibility of having multiple waves. So that's that little thing right there, array. Just like our diagram, just how we mapped it out, we should have an array of enemy waves. We do want that to be editable inside the details panel. So do click that little eyeball down there. It's editable, great, okay. So if we compile, save, come back here. If we click on our enemy wave spawner, our wave spawner, we can now define all the waves we want. Okay, so if we, right now we only have one, so we're gonna click this little plus, and again, we can assign that. And because it's only looking for wave blueprints, it's going to list, if we click the little drop down, it's only going to list the waves that exist in our level. I'll click this one that we defined here, and because we named them properly, we're doing good. And you know, maybe I want to create a new folder here, right click, create folder, and call this wave 01. Great, and then maybe we can drag these in here. Enemy wave, spawn point, got it. Just to organize, okay, great. Make sure we still have our references. Okay, now that we have our references set up, this is our wave, spawn point. This is our enemy wave starter. Wave, only have one wave. We have this all assigned. Make sure that these are all assigned. If any of these are empty right here, then it's not going to work. Open back up. Okay, so now that we've defined these, we want to figure out what to do with them. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to change this print string. Start, let's say, activate our waves. All right. And to do that, we want to cycle through each, so for each loop, each of our waves that we have assigned, we want to start spawn, or it's not start spawning. Yeah, sorry, I clicked that compile too early. Drag in your enemy waves, get enemy waves, put that into the array. So for each enemy wave that we have, what did we call this? Start spawning wave. And drag off this particular enemy wave, start spawning wave. Just make sure that this name is the same as this right here. You can think about it as a function on this class, on the enemy wave class. Make sure you connect this. So execute this thing for this particular wave, and we're going to cycle through all of them. Compile, save. Okay, cross your fingers, because what should happen is when the player enters this trigger, want to cycle through each of our waves. And as long as we've specified these, and that's when we dragged and dropped inside the world over there, right? It will call the start spawning wave event on each of those. So I'm gonna double click there. So in each wave, right now we only have one, start spawning wave and go through each of the spawn points on this wave. For each spawn point, which we defined there, and we actually defined in here, for each spawn point, call the spawn enemy, double click there, and for each enemy, spawn the enemy. So we're not actually spawning anything. We're just testing the skeletal structure of our system. Type save, close that out. Cross your fingers, it should work. But if we go here, we should see a lot of stuff pop up at the same time. Okay, so we see activate our waves. Oh, let's do that again. Activate our waves, start spawning waves, spawn enemy, spawn enemy. So we know that our system's working. And now, as long as we can actually spawn an enemy at these spawn points, then this should actually work. We should be able to spawn enemies based off this initial thing. But the cool thing about the way that we built it is it's very level design friendly. We could create multiple waves. We could create some variable number of spawn points. We could use this in other levels, provided that we set up the spawn system correctly. So we're actually going to spawn the enemies out of these in our system next, because right now we only have the structure, but we want to actually spawn the things. So we will continue and do that next.